Hey, and welcome to The Moon Underwater. I'm Kelly Daniels.
I'm Steve Jones.
And today we are going to continue last time's conversation because we started off talking about long-distance sports and how it kind of like how we do these things that are uncomfortable, and then that and we like them even though it's painful, and then we sort of morphed into travel and how that can be challenging and rewarding in ways. And then we just started going into travel stories and then the limits of the bladder, and we ran out of beer and we just thought, okay, let's stop. But I know I have like two stories that are linked that I want to tell. They're kind of long and involved. I don't know how. I didn't bring any notes this time, so I'm just going to kind of wing it. But
so I have questions I want to ask.
Yeah,
Is it travel hell? Is it travel like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened, and it was days of? Because you had the one where, you're stuck on a Greek island, you can't get off for 5 days, and you made the most of it. It wasn't probably travel hell because it was crazy. You're in college, but. What's sort of the theme of
this? This is like a little bit like a month earlier on that same trip.
Okay.
That first Europe trip when I had never really traveled before. And this is when I first split off with my buddy. And so that whole trip was a lot of like not having money, or I had money, but I didn't want to spend it. And I wanted to keep it to like $10 a day.
That's awesome.
And so I was always making decisions based on how little I could spend. And that just led me to certain places. It's also just the Cold War had just ended.
Oh, sure.
I think it was 1993.
Oh, man.
So the Berlin Wall had come down, but Prague was still it looked very communist.
Yeah.
It had a lot of communist kind of ideas and the Stalin influence, but it had these young people who wanted to party and wanted to make money. And so it was a cool city in that way, really transitional. And so anyway, that my main story is just about traveling and making an error. Did you have other questions?
But let's start with that.
You're going to cue me up for
man.
So, traveling with my buddy who had been to Europe before, and the first, few weeks of travel where I had like essentially a guide, and we were, hitchhiking and all that stuff. It was pretty wild,
great.
but I had somebody to lean on. But it became oppressive after a while having the guy that knows more than I do there all the time. And I started wanting to make decisions that every single decision had to be a compromise. And I just... And
did you feel like it was a crutch to have him there,
it
or
was
worse?
A crutch, but then the crutch became a ball and chain after a while.
Sure.
And we had also said that we would likely split up at some point. Like we weren't...
Okay.
It wasn't like we had made some blood pact where it's you and me, bro.
How did you know him?
We were buddies in San Francisco.
Okay.
I went to college there, and he had dropped out of a master's program in Stanford after he was in a PhD program.
Okay.
He didn't want to be a mathematician. And by that time, he was already coding accounting software and making money.
Yeah.
This is like 92. And here, I'll just jump to the conclusion. He was on the team that made the video game Civilization.
Oh, my God, yeah.
And then later, he was on the search engine company that I remember him telling me, like, oh, if you use Yahoo now, that's cool, use it, but pretty soon my company is going to unveil this new one. It's called Google. And so he's retired.
Good for him. Yeah.
So you could tell he's a bright guy, and there's that stereotype of the nerd that is not sociable and all that. And he's like good looking, plays guitar, he's funny, smart. And also
two kinds of nerds,
also
right?
just a really nice guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a lot of butter. Maybe he'll, if I'm nice enough, he'll give me a grant for some. His name's Eric Fredrickson. Just in case he listens in. That's a name check there.
I like it.
Anyway, so we're traveling, and again, I have this guy who's also super competent on top of just being more experienced. So I just felt I needed to have my own experience.
Sure.
And in Prague especially, it's just such a cool place. So I just asked him where he wanted to go next. He goes, I think I want to go to Greece, and it was Thessaloniki. And I said, okay, you go to Greece. I'm going to go to Istanbul. We'll meet up in Paris, at the end of our trip.
Yeah.
And I think younger people have, this is the old man kind of perspective at you young people, but young people probably just can't quite imagine what life is like without phones in your pocket.
Without a phone.
Yes, you just
oh my God,
absolutely.
it was awful.
You just have to.
Yeah.
You have like this. So we just had we figured out a youth hostel in Paris.
Yeah.
Like Paris is a big city.
Big.
And we're like, this is the date we're going to be there, and we'll just meet each other there.
That's pretty great.
And we said, okay, let's do it. And that seems crazy today, but in those days, that was it. That was the only.
Yeah.
And eventually we did meet, but the youth hostel was full. So he left like a little note on a poster, like a push board.
Oh, sure.
Like just a little letter that said, Kelly. And it goes, hey, I went to this other youth hostel because there wasn't any. So we eventually did meet up after our own adventures. So, and of course, I had kind of long, stringy hair when we left. And you know the story of cutting my hair off with the
patchy haircut.
The patchy haircut, and then I got it smoothed out in Barcelona. And then so I have like a Curious George haircut when I come back, and he's like, whoa, you've been through some shit. I'm like, yeah, kind of. Like, but so we're together, and I decide to go to Istanbul from Prague. It's a long train ride. And I needed to figure out how to get there, and I'd read in the guidebook it can be complicated. So I go to the train station, which is full communist train station. There's no English lettering anywhere. Nobody speaks English. It's all that acrylic-looking kind of letters or Czech. I guess Czech uses the same letters we do, but there's all these like little doodads on it.
Right.
It's not. You can't figure it out.
Right.
Like
it's not Latin or Latin based, and it's
So I'm in there, and I'm trying to, and I stand in this long line to find out the train, and I get to the front, and then it turns out the train to Istanbul goes through Romania, and then I find out on my guidebook that Romania demands a visa just to go through, just on a train. And it's just a money grab, essentially.
Right.
Like, and so I have to go to so I don't buy the ticket because I'm like, not sure. But I go and I go to the Romanian embassy, stand outside with some other people. And essentially I paid 25 US cash.
That's more than the $10 a day. You're figuring that into the trip at that point.
It was a pricey thing. And then I give my passport to some guard who outside of a gate, and he walks into the building. 15 minutes later, comes back with. He had a whole bunch of them. He was doing that, and then he gives them, and then I had this nice purple stamp. Oh man, I wanted to bring I have that old passport, and I didn't bring it. It has the stamps on it, and also I have like super long hair, and my passport picture is basically screams, "Search this guy for drugs." Like it is. I couldn't, and I'm like wearing this like.
How many times did you get searched for drugs when you were crossing borders? 'Cause that's back
in
before,
Europe, no, nobody. I was perfectly some grungy little American backpacker, and it was so accepted. Like there was this whole culture of people like me that there was absolutely no interest in us, which was cool. That was a really good part of it. So I get the visa. And it's a nice one. It takes up the whole page. I'm like, well, $25, that's good. So I go to get the ticket the next morning. I get up early. I know what time the train leaves. Hop on the train, buy the ticket, hop on the train. And I'm immediately put in this. It's those trains that have compartments, so they're little rooms, and you face each other.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'm packed in with these like full-on babushka ladies, and then these guys that it was like the swinging Czech brothers from Saturday Night Live.
Oh,
do you remember those guys? Steve Martin and Dan Aykroyd. Like, we are two wild and crazy guys. And these guys are like that. And
were they chain smoking?
There was maybe. I don't think there was smoking. I don't know. It seemed like there might be.
Yeah.
But they're all speaking in Czech or whatever. And we're cruising along, just click-clacking out of the city and into the countryside. And I'm uncomfortable because I'm pressed right up against these people, traveling alone for the first time. My buddy's not with me anymore.
Oh, yeah.
And this guy, like, opens his hand, like, next to me, and there's, like, a little wrapped hard candy, and he's offering it to me.
Oh.
It's sweet, but I'm also thinking, what if it's, like, a knockout drops, and they're going to, like...
Take all my stuff.
Yeah, and so I refuse it. And then I immediately realize, as refusing it, that's this completely rude thing.
And then he eats it. He doesn't get knocked out,
I
right?
think he may have eaten it, but I could tell he was offended. And then he starts talking to everybody, and I know they're talking about me. Like,
Totally.
look at this guy.
Yeah.
Like, you offer him a hard candy, and he's too good for it.
This is the only candy I have, and he won't even take it.
Totally.
What a jerk.
What an asshole I was. And I'm just sitting there. Hours go by. Finally, we stop in this city, this vast gray city that you just screams kind of like Eastern Bloc.
Yeah.
Just gray boxes, all identical.
Was it in Romania or in... Could have been.
Here's the story. I'm like, this must be Bucharest. This is the big city in Romania that...
I've been there.
Yeah, you have?
Yeah.
Yeah, well.
That's great.
Guess what you're about to find out? I haven't. So I'm there. We're in Bucharest, I think. And we're stopped, and this soldier comes in, and he's a full-on Red Army-looking soldier, or whatever, like East Berlin soldier, something like that. And he's got this bushy mustache, like that, really, like, kind of dusting the table mustache.
Like a giant, like a broom. Yeah.
Broom, but really sharply trimmed, so it's like you abrasive. If it brushed against your knuckles, you would draw blood. Kind of a mustache, gray.
He sounds really tough.
He seemed intimidating for sure. He comes in and he's yelling at me, and he asks me, and I'm ready with my $25 Visa. Hell, dude, here it is. Read it and weep. Yep. And I present it. And he's like, starts just rah, 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 and he's looking through my pages, and I'm like, what are you doing, man? And he just like barks at me, and incomprehensibly, of course, and I'm trying to answer in English, like, what? And he just walks off, like storms off with my passport.
That's what you want.
And I'm like, oh, fuck, man. And I jump up and I grab my bag. Meanwhile, everybody in the compartment who I had already offended, they're just like smugly sort of like side-eyeing me and like smiling a little bit. Like, this is what you get, man.
No.
And then this other guy pokes his head in, just this like, with this thick accent. He goes, that man, he was very mad at you. And I'm like, what? What'd I do? And he's like, he asked you to go with him, but you stay. And I'm like, well, but how am I supposed? And I'm defending myself to this guy, and the guy just withdrew his. He's like,
I'm out.
That's my message. Yeah. I have delivered it. Goodbye. I'm out of the story now. And I'm there, and I'm ready to like throw my bag out the window and jump out of the train if it starts leaving, because I can't go without
go without your passport.
And they detain a couple of guys. These like blonde guys. They totally look Swedish, and they had nice kind of like sort of like North Face-ish looking jackets, but Swedish version, and they're like pulled off the train, and they're not getting back on. They have their backpacks, and it's like, wow, this is fucked up, and something is wrong here. This isn't working the way it's supposed to. And finally the soldier comes back, and he's yelling at me, and he had given me a new passport stamp, and he's like poking it with his hand, and it's signed. It's a stamp, but then it's signed, and the signing of it is like really angry and like this scrawl. And then he gives me this new visa, and I'm like, Bucharest, and he's like, no, niet, or whatever. He's like,
no, Belgrade.
This is like Serbia. And now this is 1993, I think, which is right in the middle of the great Yugoslav war. That was like the biggest. That was
a big deal.
That was the biggest war that was going on in the world at that time. And it was I didn't know very much about it, but I had the sense that Serbia was the bad guys. They were like ethnically cleansing all these other people. Yeah. And I even knew the name of their Slobodan Milosevic. Yeah. And he was the bad guy. He was the Putin, or even worse, maybe. Well, probably similar. And then I'm like, now I'm in his clutches, and I had just wandered
you stumbled
there.
Into it, right?
It was just a different train. It was going to the same place. Like yesterday's train went through Romania. Today's train, which arrived in the same destination went through a different route, and I just didn't know that because I couldn't speak the language and nobody could, you know what I mean?
And
It's just
something else to note is that 1993, people in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, did not speak English,
Yeah.
right? It's not like today, where it's one of those. Today, you can get away with just English pretty much anywhere. I mean, there's probably a few places in Europe, Spain's one of them, where you can't. But back then, no. Like, that's ooh.
Yeah.
So being on the wrong train. Well,
Yeah,
it's on the right train.
I was going to the right place, but I was on
Through the wrong place.
Yeah, and I was also, man, that $25, like, never used it.
You never used the 25, but you wasted it. You could have
Totally.
just gone through Serbia.
I could have gone through Serbia, and and I would have, been better off. And I could, for that $25, I could have even bribed the guy with it, and he probably would have, given me a ride in his car.
Right.
Like,
How did you get back then? So you didn't go through when you went back from Istanbul. How did you go back?
Istanbul, I went down into southern Turkey. I just
Okay.
kept going. I wasn't going back.
No,
I was,
but when you went back to Paris, then.
went from Istanbul down into southern Turkey and then jumped over into the Greek Isles. I hopped around the Greek Isles, and then I got to Athens, and then I took a little plane to Barcelona.
That feels like
And then-
cheating. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe so. Planes. Yeah.
I mean-
Anyway, I
No hitchhiking, no trains, no, like we rode with it like
No,
a
but
load
the-
of cattle or something.
But here's the thing with the plane is I got there and I was hanging out in the airport, and the next flight wasn't for like 2 days. And so I ended up just living in the airport.
Sounds about right.
For like a couple of days with all these other backpackers, and the airport officials would just like move us from place to place, and we would just sort of
God.
camp out. But I went into Athens and wandered around for a while, and it was like 110 degrees,
super hot.
and
Yeah.
it was like, oh yeah, here's the sights, really cool ancient Greece, and now I'm going to go back into the airport because at least it's air conditioned, and but it was a kind of a grubby airport, and so
Okay.
I did suffer a little bit on and then the flight was easy and quick, so
Yeah.
you're right about that. But anyway, back to the train in Belgrade. So I mean, I got away with it. I was an American. They obviously didn't want to detain
No
an
international
American.
incident here, right?
Yeah,
Like-
it was just like let the kid give him a lecture and then send him on his way. And so I got lucky. And we're traveling, and then very slowly the train starts like emptying of passengers, and then I'm there by myself, and then we're driving through, and all of a sudden the landscape gets gorgeous. We're going along a river, which I believe is the Danube.
Okay.
And it's just like emerald forest with like blue water river crashing through. I mean, it was just like, wow. And
Yeah.
the train's practically empty. Finally, there's a knock on the door at a small stop. After a small stop, this blonde guy, young, my age probably, comes in timidly and smiling and sits there. And he realizes I'm an American. He has a very broken English, but he does have some English, and he wants to talk to me, and I'm like, oh great, now I'm going to have to go through this trying to figure out what he's trying to say.
Right.
But it's cool. I can do it. I already refused the hard candy. The least I could do
Maybe he
is
could help you
I could talk
at some
to
point,
yeah,
right?
maybe
Like-
so. I know. But he's like, you're American, and he's like, yeah. I kind of reluctantly admitted, I didn't
Right.
really want to advertise that. Like, just let people think I'm Canadian. That
Sure.
seemed to be.
You don't have the maple leaf pin
I
on, though. No,
couldn't-
you're not going to sell it.
I
without
couldn't
one.
pull that off. That much of a fraud, but yeah, Canadians definitely had a better reputation. And then the guy's like, "You like war? You Americans, you like war?" I'm like, "Well, no, most of
Not
not really."
particularly, yeah.
He's like, "You like Vietnam?" And I'm like, "No, I think that generally we felt that was probably not a very good."
A great decision.
Yeah, or whatever happened. But no, we have a kind of a bad feeling about Vietnam generally, and I'm speaking for all Americans.
Right.
And he's like, I don't like war either. And he's basically very slowly and choppily tells me his story. He's a soldier for Serbia,
Okay.
fighting these other people. And what he really wants to get across is that he doesn't want to shoot anybody. He doesn't
Yeah.
want to kill anybody. He just got grabbed out of the crowd, essentially. He's a young man, thrown into the army, and then gave him a gun, and now you have to go. And he's like, well, But now I'm out because I'm injured, and I'm like, oh, where'd you get injured? And I'm like wondering where he gets shot, and then he names the name of the battlefield, like Battle of Ukrak. And I'm like, okay, no, I'm not going to answer. Or ask again, like where you got shot. And we're talking, and then I feel really, and then it becomes this like sweet story where he's going back to see his girlfriend in his small town where he grew up, his village. And he's been sending her letters the whole time, but she hasn't been able to send him back because he's in this he's like moving from place to place, and nobody knows where he is. It's also kind of probably secret. And he has no idea. And he's like, meet me at the train station if you still love me. And so he's waiting to see if she's going to be there. And I'm like, oh my God, this is like stressful. And so I had this bottle of wine that I had bought in Prague.
That'll take some stress out.
And so I just break it out. I'm like, hey, you want some wine? Let's. This is a time for that bottle. So I break it out, and I have like a little cup, and I think I had a couple of cups. Anyway, whatever. We're drinking this bottle of wine. Then the conductor comes in, and he comes in to check the tickets and all that, and he sees the wine, and apparently and he kind of like
that is verboten.
He yells at me a little bit, or gives me and then the guy goes, just kind of like stage whisper. He's like, offer him a glass. And so I'm like, would you like some? He's like, and then he immediately got really happy, took the bottle, took a little swig, just purely symbolic, took a swig, gave it back to me, slapped me on the back, and then moved on.
That is fantastic.
And it was like, you're not allowed to break the rules, but if you offer me a little sip.
To also break the rules.
We're all breaking the rules. And it was so cool.
That's fantastic.
It really is. And so, this guy, we're cruising along and just, talking and not talking and companionable silence. And finally he's like, well, here we are. And we're coming up into this little village, tiny village. There's, about 50 people on the train, platform. And he's like, oh, I don't see her. I'm like, oh, maybe she'll make it. And I'm watching out the window, and he goes out, and he's on the not the runway. What's it called? The platform.
Yeah.
So on the platform, and he's looking around, and then he sees me and makes eye contact, and he gives me this shrug, like, life sucks.
We tried.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh no. And then we're pulling away, and it's at least a memory, or maybe it's just the way I've told the story, but the sun is setting. We've been traveling all day since morning. It's 10 hours later. And so it's twilight. It's that the light isn't that great. We're pulling away. There's still people on the train station. And I think I see maybe him, but somebody hugs somebody else. Like we're
going with it.
And it's just like
it was him.
It could have been.
Yep.
I give it a 50-50, but it's so. And then I kind of cruised on and got to Istanbul, and anyway, that was the start of my solo travels. And
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is a pretty sweet story. It arranged itself into a story so perfectly. It's kind of weird. It's almost like it was being directed by some director. Maybe that's my religious belief. Is a God is like this storytelling director.
It's like, hey, check this out.
And also, just like any other director, not every movie is a hit. There's some duds in there too, but every now and then it comes together.
Well, we're gonna go with it was her, right?
I think so.
At any point during this, do you remember feeling like, what have I gotten myself into? You're jammed in. Or is it about the adventure at that point? Is it like, whatever, whatever happens, it doesn't really matter?
Well, it was too late. I mean, there's
yeah.
Once you're in the train and it's moving, you can't get out.
Oh, man.
And so I didn't think about regretting it or anything like that. It was just, but yeah, when the guy left with my passport, I thought that the adventure could get very unfun.
Yeah.
And I could easily be in I always did have the kind of privilege in my back pocket of just having an American passport and, just being in a wealthy, powerful country with a huge army. And
I'm an American. Get me out of here.
Yeah. I mean, I was careful not to
Right.
throw that kind of attitude around because it didn't make you make friends.
No.
The humble way is definitely the way to do it if you're an American and you're backpacking. And other people are nice, but they'll want to rib you about being an American. And it's just that you're the rich, powerful military force, and you have to, like, you can't be acting like that,
right,
if you want people to like you. And so I felt like I probably wasn't gonna get kidnapped or thrown into jail. And
okay,
nowadays I feel like you definitely could if there wasn't. I wasn't aware of any like ISIS, like, Islamic jihad groups that are going to grab people and do that. It was more governments.
Oh, for sure then, yeah.
And the governments weren't crazy. They had their, they had their goals and they would do what they wanted. But grabbing Americans wasn't really in anybody's best interest. And I wasn't carrying drugs or anything. And so...
Right.
I thought I was going to be okay, but I definitely thought I was always in danger of being pickpocketed and robbed, and because
that's real. Yeah.
It is real, and it was also the guidebook said that that happens, and even stories about people getting knocked out. That not taking that candy, like I had heard stories, maybe urban myths, but about people getting kind of like drugged and then their stuff is stolen. And
I was riding back from Madrid with a guy. He happened to work for the UN. He was living in Baghdad. This was, post or during the Iraq War. Saddam Hussein had not been found yet, so this mid-2000s. And he was coming back to Chicago. His family lived there, and he was flying back, and he's flying back from Madrid, and I go, hey, so when did you get into Madrid from Baghdad, and how long does it take to get there? Oh, it's, you got to go here and you go there, and then I spent 4 days in Madrid. I was like, oh, you did some sightseeing? He's like, no, it's like I was out doing some sightseeing on the one day that I had, and somebody asked me if I could take their picture by a site or whatever it was, and he's like, so I put my passport, my cell phone, and my wallet between my knees, and I take the camera up to take the picture, and somebody gets me in the side of the head with a stun gun. Wow. I get knocked out, and everything's gone.
Wow.
It's like, oh, yeah, it still happens.
You remember European Vacation?
Of course.
Where they steal the video camera that he has the nudes of his wife, and then it becomes like a big hit, like erotic movie.
Fantastic.
It's awesome.
Oh, those movies are all great.
The Hot Wife or something like that, or whatever it was the name of it.
And it's unfortunate because it's like Spain, it happens a lot, so you got to watch wallets and stuff wherever you are. Italy, they're almost famous for it. Like people, I know people who've passed out with their backpack in front of them and holding on to it, and their wallet's gone when they wake up on a train. It's like
I met a guy who he was on a train in Italy, and he was being as careful as he could be. And there's like 3 guys just bumped up against him around and went through all his pockets while smiling, like just kind of casually. And he's like trying to fight him off, but there's 3 of them, and they go through his pockets until they find the stuff that they want, and then they're gone. Yeah. And okay, so there's a linked story to this.
Okay.
And we have to jump ahead. I think it's probably about 7 years, and I'm in Atlanta now in graduate school.
Okay.
So, in Atlanta, and I meet this young woman who's very kind of noticeable in a way. She's a bleach blonde hair, and she dresses like 1980s Madonna.
Okay.
With like the gloves that are like netting, and then like
a pleather something or other.
Yeah, just really a whole bunch of different elements, all kind of like funky, and like it's a cool look. Yeah. It's a really noticeable one.
Not too many people can pull this one off.
No, and this was also probably the year 2000, so it's like that's not
well beyond.
Yeah, it's well beyond. But she had a real look and a real attitude and a really thick accent. And it was this kind of Eastern European accent, and I was kind of intrigued by her, and we hung out and went out for coffee a few times, and it was like pretty friend zone right off the bat. I realized that it wasn't quite going to be there romantically, but I was interested in her. And she had this great, like, overly dramatic way of presenting herself or whatever, and she would tell me about, I knew it wasn't going to work with us when she started telling me about her dates with other guys. I'm like, okay, I'm that guy. But I also was like, I was fine with it. But she was I remember this one where she went out with this guy, and like they met for a coffee, and she knew right away it wasn't going to work. And and she said something to the effect of, yes, he ordered a non-fat decaf latte, and I could never be with such a man. There's something so impotent about that order, and like, so she was right on the money. And then I learned about her eventually, her actual story, beyond this like really frivolous, like dramatic kind of way of being.
Yeah.
She's from Sarajevo. Born and raised in Sarajevo. She was a young teenager when that city was being bombarded, and it was sieged, so food couldn't get in and out, and it was like being bombed constantly, and she was like this teenage girl, and she was telling me about it. So this is like the same period that I'm traveling through Yugoslavia on a train, and she's on the other side of that Serbian kind of aggression, I guess. Wow. And maybe it's more complicated than that, but
it's super complicated.
And but she was telling me about life, and I was like, oh my God. And I was thinking, you must have been I'm thinking of global geopolitics, right, and like different factions and the being on the liberation movement, and no, she was like, she was interested in boys, and that was like, so the parents were too busy to have any control over the teenagers. Tons of people were dead. Nobody had food or water. You had to kind of go to these distribution centers, and you had a pretty okay chance of being shot by a sniper every time you left the house. But these teenagers, you couldn't keep them in. They're teenagers.
You can't in general, right?
You can't. And so they were just out running wild in this half-abandoned city full of snipers. And here's the dynamic. All the boys, 90% of the boys were either in the army or already killed. And so there's like 10 girls for every guy.
Oh.
And these are all hormonal girls, and it's probably even more intense because of how bad everything is. And so
literally you could die any day.
And so they're all looking for guys, and every guy has like 3 or 4 girls he's juggling, and they all knew it. But the girls,
but she turned that table right around, right?
Well, she was just telling me about how it was working, and none of the girls tried to control, like, you wouldn't get mad at the boy for cheating on you.
Wow.
You just assumed he was going to. But the girls, like, policed each other. Like, it was like territorial integrity. Like, no, you don't mess with my guy, and I won't mess, and like, but none of the girls abided by it. They would just like, and so there was like full-on fist fights, and the girls were at each other's throats all the time over who was, and the guys were just like living their best lives. And they're also the guys that didn't join the army, so they're like the deserters or something, like, and they're just back having 5 girls per guy. And anyway,
well, that's what I mean. She turned the tables when she went to Atlanta, right? Like, she's dating all these guys, and she's like, "You're just one of them." It doesn't.
Oh yeah, she had more experience of like how difficult the world can be than anybody, and she had this real, kind of like Madonna persona that you can kind of understand if you have this traumatic childhood, and then but yet you've got this kind of pose toward the world, and she's dating guys, and she doesn't want a guy that is going to drink non-fat decaf. Like,
she knows that check that guy off the list.
Yeah,
like,
you're not
his name out.
If you can't like grab a Kalashnikov and take out a sniper potentially, then
do you think a coffee is going to kill you? Like,
I mean, so she was pretty
crazy.
tough. And so here's my link of these 2 stories. Besides the fact that
the same country.
Well, how about the soldier in the train somehow meets the Sarajevo Madonna girl in some unimaginable way, but then they just kind of, And then, it's like symbolic healing of the two countries, but also he's certainly tough enough, but also sensitive.
Sure.
He didn't want to shoot anybody, but they made him, and he's wounded in some way. I don't know, understand, but assuming he can
in a Hemingway kind of way.
I was
like
wondering
you're never
about
know.
that. Yeah. Is he
just talks about it, writes about it vaguely?
Can he still perform?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe that's the future. Is maybe he did get stood up at the.
But he met her.
But then he met her later,
Okay.
or either maybe he made it to America, or she went back, or something. So that's it.
I've got a couple as well, and they're. One of them is it goes back to cell phones, not having them, and like the difficulty of traveling at the time.
Yeah.
I had a friend when I was in high school whose family moved to Brussels for like a couple years, and so buddy of mine and I went over when we were like 17.
So this is before cell phones.
Yeah.
Okay.
This was 1997, and we went over, and it was understood that we were going to be going around and doing day trips to like Amsterdam and Paris. We were going into Brussels. We went to Bruges. We did, a few other things, but this was like a short trip, and I was still in high school. And so we went, and we were coming back from, I think it was Paris. It may have been Amsterdam, but we got into Brussels, and then we needed to take a train out to Waterloo, which is where he was living. And we didn't have any cell phones, but we were all together as a group. There was 8 of us that were friends of his from there, and we got on the train to go out to Waterloo, and it's kind of late, and we decided that we need to go from where we are up to the front where everybody else is. So rather than go through the train at the next stop, we would get off and run, and then get back on.
Okay.
And we did that, except that the
One
stop was very short.
Yeah.
And half the people were on the train.
Yeah.
The other half were not.
Wow.
And it was one of those like...
I don't quite understand. So you stop and you wanted to get off the train.
To get further up, so we didn't have to go through the interior of the train to get to the front of the...
I see. Okay.
And, 17-year-old was like, well, we'll just run and we'll get off and run. How hard could that be?
And the conductor wasn't going to wait until everybody got on, apparently. It just, was going to go.
No, it was going. And there wasn't anybody else really that got off, so we got off, and then that was it.
Oh.
Doors closed. And it's...
Yeah.
And it's like a local train at that point, so it's not a huge deal.
Yeah.
But somebody on the train decided that in order to keep everybody together, they should pull the emergency stop.
Oh, my God.
That cost at least $200 in cash, which I was never sure actually went to anything other than they were annoyed that we did it.
Yeah.
I was one of the ones
200
outside the
not
train.
per person.
No,
Everybody
no.
just had to break out their own tent spot.
And it was in cash though, which is like the dead giveaway.
Yeah.
We got yelled at, and it was one of those like, all you guys had to do was wait for us in the next stop, and we would, there's a train 10 minutes behind us. How come you? Well, we didn't know what to do. And it's like, okay, it's fine. And it was one of those. I think about it now. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't exist with cell phones.
Oh yeah, you would just text, bummer, missed the thing. I'll catch you in the next one or whatever.
And we got off, and it was by accident because we made it. We made it like up to the door.
Yeah.
And somebody saw that we weren't, and they they didn't break the glass, but it was a pull of the, and the authorities were not pleased. This was in Belgium.
Yeah.
And that was one of those like, okay, yeah, this like that could go away. And that's like one of the, as I thought about it, you're talking about like how easily cell phones make problems go away. I've had a couple of interesting flight experiences going into Spain in particular. And my personal favorite was, this was in 2009. Well, no, I'll start with the earlier one. 2002. I was flying over to Spain for the summer. I just graduated from Iowa, and I went over in like late June, and I'd gotten a ticket post 2001, post 9/11. You could get some cheap tickets, and I went on to Orbitz and I bought a ticket for $700.
Right.
That went Chicago to Madrid.
Yeah.
Then there was a 6-hour layover in Madrid. Then Barcelona.
Yeah.
Like 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
Then Valencia. And I was like, okay, well, that's the cheap way to go. That's what I'm going to do because that's what I can afford. And I got into Madrid, and there's nothing to do, so I'm just walking. Like, I'm walking and walking and walking and walking. And I spend the 6 hours, and I'm watching all these other flights go, and I ask if I can maybe go early. No, because you bought the ticket on Orbitz. That's a low-cost site. We cannot change you.
Yeah, they want to punish you for...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't do that, even though all the airlines kind of own that.
Yeah.
Like that's the... and I ended up... I'm watching these flights go, and they're all on time, which is relatively unusual for Madrid. Usually the airline kind of, you get there when you get there. And then my flight comes up, and we're delayed.
Yeah.
And we're delayed like 30 minutes. Now I had about an hour on the ground. 30 minutes turns into 45.
Yeah.
We leave late, get into Barcelona.
Yeah. Missed your flight.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I did the... I wasn't pounding on the desk, but I'm like, so I'm an American. I get how these things work. Like, you guys have, like vouchers for this sort of thing, so I can get like a hotel room because I am exhausted right now. I spent a night on the airplane. I really could use a place to go and lay down.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, yeah, it doesn't work like that here.
Yeah. Even though it's their fault.
Yeah.
Like, there's no weather or anything. It's just,
They said, are you hungry? And they're asking, a lot of this is in Spanish at this point. My Spanish had gotten a lot better since my first trip. And I went, yeah, I am hungry. They go, here is 30 euros in food vouchers, and it's outside of security. Okay? It was an 8-hour delay in Barcelona. And I did nothing but walk up and down that airport, one end to the other.
Yeah.
I went out several times to eat because the 30 euros went a lot further than I thought it would. It was 2 meals.
Nice.
And I got in, but it was that moment where I was like, the entitlement that I had that this is going to get solved and they are going to give me something. And they were like, no, we are not.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's...
Yeah, and that's one of it. That was one of those, okay, I learned my lesson. Like, I know who I'm going to book with now. I'm not going to do certain things.
Yeah.
And then in 2009, we had a follow-up experience where we were flying into Madrid out of Chicago, and immediately out of the gate, I spilled a bottle of water on my seat.
Nice.
So it's a really great way to start.
Yeah. And it looks like you pissed yourself, too.
It does. Yeah. And fortunately, I had the pillow in the blanket, which soaked up most of it. And so we're flying in, and I have I grew up as an airline brat, and I tend to know when things are wrong or things are happening. And we got to where we were over Madrid, and I went, "Oh my God, we're circling." And so something is wrong on the ground. And all of a sudden, it's 5 minutes later, I tell my wife this. She's pregnant, about 4 months with our first kid, and she's like, "You're crazy." And a couple minutes later, they announce, "Yep, there's been some snow in Madrid. They're clearing the runways and we're going to land."
Oh, boy.
And I was like, no. Flight attendant comes up, and because she hears us talking about it, she's like, "I live in Madrid. It snows all the time." And I was like, "Really?" I've been to Madrid. I was like, okay. I've only been there a couple times. I don't, through the airport in the winter. I don't know. And
those people lie to you, though.
They absolutely lied.
I have definitely caught like official communication coming from the cockpit, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then I think about it, and I'm like, that is total bullshit.
Yeah, we are fucked. It's basically what, like, we circled for another 30 minutes. They went, well, they haven't gotten the runways cleared yet.
Yeah.
We're going to go to Malaga and sit. And first they announced somewhere else, and I had an ear infection at the time, so, like, my eardrum's hurting. And we finally get on the ground. We sat for another 3 hours on the ground. They refueled and eventually got us into Madrid. Now, we had another flight to go to Valencia, where my loving wife is from. And we
There
got
are no trains from like Madrid to Valencia.
there are.
Yeah.
But a certain someone preferred, not me, the flights because, well, it's just so much easier. You're already at the airport.
Yeah.
Even if you have to wait 4 hours, I'm like, yeah, but the trains go every hour and they're cheaper. And you got to go to the train station. So it's a little harder, even though there's trains that run directly there.
Yeah.
So we ended up, we get on the ground and we're walking in and I'm going, hey, we're trying to get to Valencia. What do we need to? They go, just go into the terminal. You just go inside. You just go. Oh, okay. So we walked in, and I later described it as like lambs to the slaughter. It was. It's the longest line I've ever seen in an airport.
Yeah.
And we made line friends because we were in the line so long. There was backpackers behind us. They were Australian because Aussies are everywhere.
Yeah.
The people in front of us were Spanish. And I think in front of them there were some Italians.
Yeah.
We waited in line to get to the front. Now, meanwhile, there's a lot. We have a lot of time, so I'm like checking flights to Valencia to see if we can get on, to see if there's something we can just show up and go. We waited 9 hours in line.
Yeah.
In the Madrid airport.
That was so my Athens airport experience was kind of like that.
It's like you're living there.
Yeah, we were camped out in line, and then, but even after we got our tickets and stuff, we still had to hang around. And that's a nightmare.
And it was for 2 inches of snow, actually a little bit less.
Yeah.
So no, it doesn't snow in Madrid.
Yeah.
And we ended up with we were like, can we take the train? Well, I called the airline. I called American in this case, and they were like, well, they might not let you fly on your return trip because you didn't take the plane, like your whole, now there's like a whole means of travel where people book flights through somewhere else.
Yeah.
And they get a cheaper rate to go. So
it's called skip hopping, or what's it called?
I think so.
It's supposed to be not.
They're really trying to get rid of it.
It's not illegal, but it's against their policy, and they will kind of like punish you if
they ban people.
Yeah, things like that.
And so American was like, yeah, it's an Iberia ticket. We really can't help you. You should call them. And that was like, well, that's not going to happen. And this was, cell phones existed, but they didn't really work in Europe.
Yeah.
For us. And so it was one of those like, okay, well, we're just going to have to stand in this line and wait. And it now we rarely will fly all the way to Valencia. That was one of those last, like, okay, well, we're not doing it anymore.
Well, and especially if there's a train. The thing about a train,
they're the best,
is if one of them doesn't work out, there's another one after. And, and you can, being on a train, even a long distance kind of, you can walk up and down the aisles. There's usually a car where you can order stuff to eat and drink.
Yep.
And it's a pleasant, you can look out the window, stuff's going by. It's easy to meet people. Planes you're in this little sardine can box. You're boxed in there. And unless you can get like first class or maybe business, it's pretty miserable. So
even on the short ones, like that's a 45-minute flight from Madrid to Valencia. It's not bad. But if I have to wait in the airport 5 hours for it,
I know.
I'm like, well, the train, if we go out and, okay, it takes probably 45 minutes to get to the train station.
Yeah.
And then it's an hour and 30-minute ride on a high-speed train.
Yeah, but that's still...
That's the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and now in Spain, the high-speed train lines have been opened up to other companies besides the Spanish Renfe, which is pretty good. But I think there's both a French and an Italian train carrier that use the high-speed lines. You can get tickets from Madrid to other places for like $10.
Yeah,
and that's how we traveled when I was younger. It was the slow-speed trains.
Yeah.
But it was, and we did do a TGV trip between Brussels and Paris, which was spectacular in the late '90s. Like, a 180-mile-an-hour train is crazy.
Yeah.
So it's one of those. Now travel is getting a lot easier. I think that was one of the other things I wanted to mention. Like if you think about places that you can go now that
Yeah.
were inaccessible or you would never have thought to go, and it's like, it's not that bad. I mean,
An acquaintance of mine, I think, is in Antarctica right now. Like,
Isn't that cool?
I mean, people go there for. There's just basic tourism there, but there's also a lot of ways to go there as part of like some kind of non-profity sort of thing. There's stuff to do. There's all these scientific things out there, and you can. Like some guy I knew is going there. He signed on for like several months, like 8 months, for some scientific thing, but he's going to be like the handyman.
Oh, sure.
It's just a contract.
That's cool.
And nobody would think about going there not too long ago.
No.
It's cool. I mean, it's cool. Something is lost when it gets easier and easier.
Right.
And
I had a goal when I was like 18 that I would step foot on every continent minus Antarctica, because at that time that was inaccessible.
Yeah.
And I didn't make it by the time I was 30, and I didn't make it. I made it to Australia, which I kind of thought was the hard one.
Yeah.
And I made China in my early 30s. And if we're not counting the Canary Islands, which are off the coast of Africa, the one I didn't make was Africa. South America, I've
Still
done it.
time.
I need to. That's one of those that seems easier and easier every year too.
Yeah.
And there's about a half dozen places I can think of just off the top of my head of where I want to go.
Africa, this is a slight shift in conversation, and we probably shouldn't let it go forever because. I know there's a lot of African students at Augustana College where I work, and they're very bright, and they're just a great kind of addition to the campus.
For
and
sure.
What I've read is that almost every continent, every area, certainly the wealthier nations, all have like these like crashing populations. They don't have enough young people. And Africa is the sort of fountain of youth in a way. They've got so many young people, and they are just, I'm not sure what my point is, except that I think we're going to see. I'm not sure how Africa itself is going to grow from it, but I feel like that continent, and certainly some of those countries are going to develop fast.
They're resourceful, and they're one of the big ones at Augustana that's represented is Morocco.
Oh yeah,
and that is absolutely on my list.
Yeah,
and
I hear it's great.
I've heard it's amazing.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm always making lists of like where I want to go.
Yeah.
And so I have one last question for you.
Okay.
One of my favorite things. I hated. I don't know if everybody's aware. There was this thing called COVID around 2020. Really stifled travel. It killed me.
Hundreds of years from now, when people are listening to this, that's good context that you're adding in there.
It was brutal.
So COVID was not fun.
It was really bad for me. I did not handle it very well. I went stir crazy because I couldn't go anywhere.
You're an extrovert, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I do feel like a lot of introverts were like, now finally the world is the way I've always wanted it to be. Nobody goes anywhere.
Right.
I'm not expected to go anywhere. I'm not allowed to go anywhere. And it's great. Everything is online. DoorDash brings me my food. And then there's the extroverts who are basically,
I was pulling my hair out.
Oh, yeah. It's
So we used to do like Friday afternoon. We would have cocktails at work via, the Teams meeting. Which
I hated that shit.
I hated all that.
Like I tried it a couple times. I'd make like a cocktail and then have a Zoom meeting with like 2 or 3 friends, and then I'm like,
it's not the same.
What a bunch of bullshit this
is. It's not the same.
Yeah.
So needless to say, we don't do it anymore. There's a good reason why we don't do that anymore, right? Because it sucks. But at the time, it's what we had, and I like to play a game, or like everybody gets to come up with a question, and you ask your question and explain your answer. And my question, my big one that I came up with was, if the pandemic ended tomorrow, where would you go? Like, you could go on any vacation you've ever wanted to go, any country you've ever wanted to be in. You could do whatever you wanted to do. It ends right now. Where are you traveling?
Oh God. Well, what kind of hypothetical are we working in? If I have a family and stuff, then I'm...
You make it your own. You make your question your own. If you want to say, look...
The one thing I didn't do that I wanted to do that was my next on my list of backpacking. My backpacking career ended pretty fast. I just kind of
would you go backpacking again?
I would do it with more money this time
Yeah.
and have like a backpacking, but like nicer backpacking.
Okay.
Just instead of like a youth hostel where I'm in a bunk bed with other people, I would get a decent motel-ish like place. Or like Airbnb kind of rooms.
There's some really good ones.
Really nice place, but not corporate vacation centers, But what I would do, what I never got to do, or I just didn't do, was to just show up with like the next 6 months to a year, maybe a year clear on my calendar, and then just fly into Bangkok with an open-ended ticket.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And then just jump around from there, and then kind of go out. And if for a year, of course, 6 months, I think you could really explore that region.
For sure.
A year, you could go around the world, really, and certainly go into all through Asia.
That's a good one.
So I think that would be my...
Okay.
But then there's like the bicycling around the world kind of adventures.
Yeah.
And even those like... People go on those like walks that, like that longest walk in the world is like something like 20,000 miles or something, and you can actually walk it somehow, like overland.
I think of like the Camino del Santiago, right? Like that's a big one.
Yeah.
That's more work than I want to put in. But.
Yeah. What about you?
I would change my answer, right? So like, I have as a kid, as an airline brat, and my dad eventually flew planes that were big enough and had the distance that would go to Tokyo. I was dying to see Tokyo.
Oh, yeah.
So for a while that was on my list, and it still is, right? That's why the pandemic had to end, because Japan was so locked down. There was really no they weren't letting anybody in even well into 2021. So it would go from that to, like in probably August, I think I was like, I really want to ski in August and, go to Chile. And I'd skied once before in August. The place that I went was billed as the largest ski resort in South America, and it was big, but they get enough snow about once every 20 years or so to open the whole thing up. So it felt like I went and I did the thing I always wanted to do, but that there was somewhere better that I should have gone. So I felt like missed out, right? So sometimes it would be that. There was, like Cape Town was on the list, but it depended on the day.
Yeah.
So I had a few different answers, but as I would ask the question, I would hear the things that other people would say, and like what you just said of, give me 6 months and drop me off in Bangkok. That sounds pretty good. Like I'll take one of those too.
Yep.
So it's something that I still try to think about and try to dream a little.
And everything you said, I want to do that too. And you kind of balance this dream of travel and the utter freedom of it, but then, we've got families.
There's a reality.
I didn't want to not have a job and not have a family, and you can't. And so there's a sort of blend of trying to get your travel in, and then there's, maybe the future will have retirement age where these oldies are traveling in that way.
I think so. But is there any doubt about why we married women that are not from the U.S.?
Yeah, it seems pretty.
It's like the adventure, right?
Yeah, there's that quest for novelty, I think, and newness, and which is what novelty means.
Yes, it does.
Just
That's
in
true.
case anybody out there. I guess I led a study abroad course in Mexico recently, and I made it kind of like a backpacking 101 course, and I did start thinking about just that as an entrepreneurial thing rather than doing it through an institution, but just kind of bringing people on backpacking trips and just kind of making that a side hustle or even a career. And I know those kind of things exist. And I don't know, it's appealing in a way, but in another way, the opposite of the freedom of backpacking is being in charge of 25 novices who are in varying degrees needy.
Yeah.
And you're taking them to your secret spot, and then you're kind of like ruining it in a way by making it not a secret spot.
That's hard.
And but, you know, people need to make a living. And
yeah.
Whew.
Yeah, that is that can be a difficult like your secret spot, like letting people know, hey, this is a really neat place to go, and it's safe, and it's you know, like, hey, and it's quiet, and it's fun, and that's not but it also opens people's eyes. Like I think everybody should travel. I think you should see the world.
Oh yeah.
It'll change you.
We'd be a better country, and we'd be a better world if everybody had. Mark Twain has that famous thing, like there's nothing so hostile to bigotry or something than travel or you know, small-mindedness and bigotry. True. It's like it's really easy to kind of like be afraid and hate people who are way far away that you just have this vague idea about. But when you show up at their place and they offer you a tea
or a hard candy,
and you realize that they're screwed up in ways, but just like we're all screwed up in ways, and they're also nice in ways, and then you meet the guy that's the soldier that got injured, and you're worried about whether his girlfriend's going to show up or not, and you're, you know what I mean?
She showed up. I decided she showed up.
So you're not going with the Madonna Sarajevo. That's a little far-fetched, probably. Yeah.
But you know, there's reason to believe that it could have happened. You know, but no, I want to believe that he met the original girlfriend.
I feel like we should end on that.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else? Or
I do not. Just the rest of this beer that we'll finish as we roll out.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Let me see if I can find the music here. Wait, I'm gonna. This is such a slick operation here.
It is.
I keep turning down the sound pad thing, and so now I'm ready to go. Here we are.
Here we go. Thanks.
Bye-bye, everybody.